Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time to start. Welcome to this webinar. This is a PDF Toolbox webinar, callas PDF Toolbox webinar, as you can see from the branding on the slides that I have here as well. And it's a little bit similar as something I've done a couple of months ago, which was an introduction to PDF Toolbox. But what we realize is that there's actually a lot of things you can do with PDF Toolbox, so much so that it is sometimes difficult to find out whether certain things work and how they will work and whether the product is suitable for a particular market segment or type of product. And so what we're going to do today is to talk about PDF Toolbox in the context of one particular market segment. And that, as you can see on the slide, is banner and sign, or perhaps you want to call it LFP, large format print, maybe sign and display. There's different names, but you know what we're talking about. So we're going to look at PDF Toolbox. I'm going to do a little bit of a presentation so that you can get some context, but also mainly so that we have something that we can share with you afterwards. And then mostly I'm going to try and show some of these things in the product itself, because that is what makes it interesting, right? Not the presentation, but the actual product. So that's the plan. We're going to try and do this in about, let's say 45 minutes. That will be my internal goal or target. And probably you will have questions while I'm showing things. There is a questions box that you have with this webinar software. And so if you run into questions, just add them into the questions box. And then either one of my colleagues, Cindy is here, for example, either one of my colleagues or I myself will look at them at the very end of the webinar, and then we'll try to answer all of them. And that's just because it's easier to do it at the end. Maybe the question you have is answered throughout the webinar as we go along. And so at the end, we can see what is still left unanswered. So that is one thing, put your questions in there. Second, very administrative thing that I can point to is that this is, of course, recorded, and the recording will be posted on YouTube once it has been edited a little bit. So a couple of days after the webinar, or a little bit longer, depending on how long it takes, you will be able to rewatch it on YouTube as well. Let's get this show on the road. Like I said, this webinar is about callas PDF Toolbox for banner and sign. So we're going to be looking at jobs that typically are a little bit bigger. They are probably printed on some kind of, well, in many cases, inkjet digital technology. And typically also the kind of job where you have a bunch of finishing going on. So we're going to look at all of those aspects of PDF Toolbox that can help you in processing those types of jobs. Callas PDF Toolbox, I've looked at the list of people who are joining, but of course I don't know who is going to watch this afterwards on YouTube. I think most of the people who are joining today know what Callas PDF Toolbox is. If not, it is PDF technology that can inspect PDF files, which typically is referred to as pre-flight, and it can also, in many cases, correct PDF files. So a lot of the things that you can detect as potential problems can also be manually or automatically corrected. And PDF Toolbox certainly focuses on the automatic part of the correction. So the goal of the software in many cases is to make sure that no one has to look at the PDF files manually, but that they can go through PDF Toolbox and out comes a production-ready file. That is the ultimate dream, right? What we also see, and I will show you some examples of that today as well, is that in many cases, the correction capabilities of pdfToolbox are not just used to fix pre-flight problems. They are also in many cases used to create production variants, perhaps. Maybe you want a low-res proof. Maybe I want a proof that also has some metadata about the job on it. But maybe I just want to add production elements like cut and fold lines or a cut contour, maybe a barcode. So it's not just about quality control and then fixing issues that were discovered during quality control. It is very often also about making production ready files. And more we see pdfToolbox used throughout this whole workflow, from file reception and quality control to the moment that things like delivery documents have to be created or proofing documents have to be created. I've included this one slide to show that the technology comes in different flavors. I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but essentially I'm going to show you today things with pdfToolbox Desktop, which is the manual version of the tool. Just be aware that there is also a hot folder based version and a command line based version and a pdfToolbox SDK, and that these are suitable for automated workflows. And of course, they run on multiple platforms. And this is software that is not too difficult on the operating system when it comes to requirements and so on. And it runs on Mac, Windows, and a whole bunch of different Linux variants. So you can use it just about anywhere. And I could just as easily use it on a Windows server machine that is hosted locally here as I could on a Amazon Linux distribution running in the Amazon cloud. So from that point of view, pdfToolbox is very, very versatile and runs just about anywhere. Okay, so we're done with that. What we're going to talk about today, I have lightly split up into 6 different topics, ranging from the pre-flight we were talking about to issues that have to do with the size of documents, which is probably one of the major remaining problems when you look at files coming in from customers, right? That they might not be the correct size or they might not have correct page boxes and so on that you need for production. So we're going to take a look at that. We're also going to look a little bit at color and text issues. We're going to talk about bleed, which is an important topic and where pdfToolbox has a wide range of possibilities. We're also going to talk about something very specific for banner and sign, which is grommets or eyelets, depending on what the terminology is that you use, and tiling. And then I'm going to end this by talking about proofing and the creation of, well, proof versions of a PDF file. And something that is a little bit more complex than just a low-res RGB version of the file. I want to show you how to mix metadata about the job, information about the job, and a preview of the job into something that looks really nice. So these are the topics, and we're just going to tackle them one by one. I'm going to show you some slides in the presentation, but in most cases, I'm probably just going to skip the slides and focus on highlighting things in the software so that I can show a little bit more detail than what I can do on the slide. Pre-flight. Pre-flight or quality control, as you know, is the process of looking at a PDF file and saying whether it is suitable for a particular purpose. Is it suitable to print on a roll-to-roll inkjet device that has certain requirements on color spaces and maybe minimum text size, image resolution, and so on? That process is commonly called pre-flight, and pdfToolbox obviously implements a lot of things around pre-flight. I've listed some of the maybe important things here. There is support for standards, obviously. Callas, the company that creates pdfToolbox has been involved and is involved in standards organizations such as ISO, such as the Gantour Group, such as the PDF Association, and more. And compliance with all of these standards has always been a very big part of the product. And very often, they are also the first ones to come out with pre-flight profiles that implement compliancy for certain standards. And so if you look at the product, you'll see that there is a long list of ISO standards that are supported. And in most of the cases, you can either check a file, so not change it, just tell me where the problems are, the potential problems are, but you can also fix things. Whether you only check or you check and fix really is a business decision. pdfToolbox allows both of them. It's up to you in your business to decide what makes most sense. And there is obviously in pdfToolbox support for all of the banner and sign specific problems as well. And well, one example of that is that when the Gantour Group came out with a pre-flight profile specifically for banner and sign workflows, that is also fully supported in pdfToolbox. Once you've pre-flighted something, you can create a report, and the report can be a PDF report. You see a small sample of that here. Contains general information. It can also be completely adjusted to fit with whatever it is that you want to show to users in a particular workflow. And maybe it's special separations, maybe it's something else, maybe it's dimensions that you want to show. And the reports can also be created as XML or as JSON files, which makes it very easy to integrate them into a larger automated workflow. In there, what you also have is the fact that you can use variables inside of pdfToolbox. And in many cases, this is really necessary if you want to fully automate. Instead of creating 1,500 different pre-flight profiles or quality control profiles, I can create one, and I can use information about the job that, for example, comes from the web shop or comes from the MIS system, and then use that while I pre-flight the PDF files. And you see an example here where the customer on the web enters the width and height of a banner, and where that width and height is then used by pdfToolbox to make sure that the PDF that the customer uploads matches that specific width and height. Okay. So that variable technology is something that has been supported in pdfToolbox for years and years. It is easy to use, at the same time very powerful, and allows you to create these automated workflows with a minimum of effort that support a wide range of what you need in a web shop or in an MIS system. So let me go to the to pdfToolbox desktop. I have it here on my screen, and what I can do is I can take a file, and I'll just take a banner file for that, and I can run one of these pre-flight profiles. There are actually two terms that I'm going to use here. One is profile. That's the thing with this blue icon at the front, and it's kind of a collection of things I want to check in a file and things that I want to fix in a file. You also have something that is called a process plan, which are all the things with the yellow icons in front. And a process plan it's very similar to a profile, but it allows conditional processing, like look at this file, and if it contains this, then do step A. If it doesn't contain that, then do step B instead. So it allows a little bit more control and intelligence, and it allows you also to run a number of steps that aren't really possible with profiles. So what happens when I run a profile? I'm not even going to fully run it in this case, but I do want to show you this first screen. So I clicked on the profile for large format print, which is one of those standard profiles. It comes from the Gantt group, and it is specialized in checking PDF files for large format print or banner and sign workflows. And it uses two variables to do its job. The first one, a scaling factor, because in many cases, customers will not actually deliver the PDF file at full size, but they might deliver it at, I don't know, 1/10 of the size or half the size for various reasons, mostly because very large PDF files are not always well supported by the creative applications. So the pre-flight profile can take that into account. And then that profile is also built on a viewing distance. And for a banner, that could be 1 meter, 2 meters. It's kind of like the average distance that you expect there to be between an observer, me looking at the banner, and the banner itself. And that is also used to determine, in terms of image resolution, for example, what is the image resolution that we need in order for things to look high quality from that distance. And so when you run that, and I'm not going to do that right now because I have more interesting things I want to talk about, but when you run that, it will generate a report, and you've seen one of those on the in the presentation before, but you'll get a report, and that report contains different sections or can contain different sections. This is fully customizable. And it can also, and in many cases does, contain a copy of the original file, but then, for example, with annotations on top of it that highlight where there are problems and if there are problems in the file. So remember from the pre-flight part, anything really that you want to detect because it could be a problem in production later can be detected. You just need to have a profile. That profile could be a standard profile that is already included in pdfToolbox, or it could be something that you create from scratch, or you can take a standard profile and then duplicate it and modify it. So all of these things are supported. You can check the file, you can fix the file, and in the end, you will get some kind of report. And those reports can be used either for people to look at them, or they can be optimized for further automated processing. Good. So that much for the pre-flight part. I want to talk a little bit about size. Size of the PDF file, not as in byte size of the file, but size as in width and height and some of the other parameters. There's a whole range of functionality that is supported by pdfToolbox in this area. I've picked out a number of things that are potentially interesting, and these have to do, for example, with scaling. Very common occurrence as you know, in large format is that files are submitted as 1/10 or half of the size of what they should be printed at. pdfToolbox can standardize that as the file comes in. And that is something that we see that happens a lot. Everything is standardized to 1:1 ratio, first of all, and then all the other workflow steps are done. What is really nice about pdfToolbox is that using these process plans that it supports, you can start doing conditional processing. And so I could first see whether the size is correct. And if it's not correct, then decide to scale it. I could go one step further and say, okay, I'm going to check whether the size is correct. But if it doesn't deviate from what I want too much, then I'm going to scale it. If it deviates too much, then I'm going to not touch it, and I will have someone look at it manually. So you can make those kinds of decisions as well. You can scale only if the aspect ratio is what you would expect, or if there isn't too much difference between the aspect ratio of what you expected and what the customer has delivered. So you can start building very intelligent workflows. This is not just scaling up 2 times or 4 times or whatever it is, you can really start making very intelligent process plans that look at details of the file and then decide how they are going to fix it. And I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. The other thing that you can do is fix what is called page boxes, right? On the left-hand side here, you see a file that comes in really without any page boxes. So there's probably a trim box, but then the trim box is the same as the bleed box, is the same as the media box, and so on. What you can do again is build logic into there, and I could create the version of the file I have on the right-hand side, where I added a bleed box, and then the media box is still a little bit larger at the top and the bottom. Maybe the space I want to add at the top and the bottom is different than what I want to add left and right. So all of these requirements that you have for very specific jobs can be handled perfectly by that. And what I'm going to show you for that is a nice example of a large flyer, if you want. Or poster is probably a better word in this case. And what you can see is that there are, I hope you can see that during or over the screen sharing. What you can see is that there is a, well, there are crop marks in here, but the crop marks are not reflected in a trim box. There is no trim box for this particular file. And so we could, of course, manually fix this file to include the correct trim box, but that is kind of annoying. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run a process plan, and that process plan is going to attempt to fix this document for me. And we'll just save it in our results folder here. And you'll see that it will go through a whole bunch of steps. You'll probably see the display on the left-hand side change very strangely as we're doing things. This is because the process plan in this case contains quite a bit of logic to figure out where these crop marks are. And then once it has determined where the crop marks are, it is going to put in a correct trim box. And then once we have the correct trim box, it will also set all of the other boxes correctly. And so if it would want to finish that, then that would be good. There we go. So the end result is, and now I do have a correct trim box in there, and it is actually exactly the size that I want it to be based on those trim marks. It has corrected all of these things automatically for me. As you can see, there is quite a bit of logic that went into this process plan. And if I would open that process plan, you can see that all of that logic. There is some scripting in here. There are some actions in here. There's actually another process plan that is called. So if you have things in a workflow that are relatively complex, pdfToolbox, and specifically the process plans in pdfToolbox, can help you to intelligently change that document, examine the document, and then change the document until you have the result that you finally want. And where normally I would probably have to open this document either in Acrobat, or maybe in some cases people would open it in InDesign, and then change the boxes manually. Here I can change them completely automatically, and I still end up with the correct result. And there is a lot of this functionality that I was talking about that is used in this process plan. There is scaling going on. There is a comparison of aspect ratios going on. The different page boxes are fixed until I have exactly what I was looking for. So all of these things are part of that process plan. Okay. Let's look at the next bit, color and text. And I'm not going to spend too much time because this is kind of basic functionality if you want. But I do want to point out that you can, of course, do color related processing. I can use ICC profiles to convert from RGB to CMYK. I can use device link profiles. pdfToolbox does not allow you to create profiles, color profiles, but it can use them if you have them. So if you have, for example, device link profiles that do a conversion from CMYK to a 6 or 7 color space, then pdfToolbox can run those on PDF files. If I have device link profiles that do a conversion from sRGB to a particular CMYK color space, then pdfToolbox can run those. If I wanted to use pdfToolbox for ink save or tack reduction or something like that, then that is also a possibility. The other thing is there is, and I'm sorry for the green on the previous slides. I know that the red you're looking at now probably hurts. It hurts my eyes as well. The other thing it can do is work with spot color. So if I have a file that contains spot colors, I have a number of different things I can do. I could change the alternate color space, the color mix that lives in the PDF file. I could change it to a completely different spot color. Here I've changed the color mix, but I've also changed the name from callas red to pdfToolbox blue. Or I could simply convert a spot color in my PDF document to CMYK. So if you know that you're going to print everything as CMYK, then pdfToolbox can simply convert the whole document into CMYK. The text bit here, and I hesitate to show you that this is possible because I have another presentation somewhere on the internet where I say that you should not do this. But I know it's done anyway, and there are certainly use cases, business cases where it makes sense to do it. So it's worthwhile telling you about it. If I have a document that contains live text, as I have on the left-hand side, there is obviously the ability in pdfToolbox to convert that text to vector elements, vectorize the text if you want. And if you have a document that is either too complex or you believe that the RIP that you're using will have problems with it, then vectorizing that live text into vector elements might be one strategy to avoid that complexity. There are other strategies in pdfToolbox that you can follow. You can, for example, convert the whole document or every page in the document to an image, rasterize it to effectively also create a very simple version of the document that perhaps is easier to print. With all of these techniques, of course, you have to be a little bit careful that you don't destroy the document, I would say, that you don't reduce the quality of the document too much. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, like I said, largely because you should be careful when you do things like vectorizing text, and you shouldn't do it for everything. But it is certainly possible, and it's just a little fix-up that you can run, and where you decide what elements are going to be vectorized, and this can be used to vectorize all text if that is something that you need. On the color side, again, I'm not going to show examples of that. I think you understand how that works. As I said while looking at the presentation, just know that if you have color profiles, that you'll be able to use them in pdfToolbox and run them on documents, so that you have only the colors that you want to print. Let's talk about bleed. Bleed is, of course, the technique where you add content around the trim box, and it is something that in these banner and sign files is often very, very important. And I only have a very simple slide here, but I'll use it to explain some of the principles, and then I'll show you a number of examples. What pdfToolbox can do is add bleed around the trim box. It can add that with different amounts on different sides of the trim box, which in banner and sign very often happens. If I have a roll-up banner, for example, maybe I want bleed only at the top and the bottom. Maybe I also want it on the left and right hand side, but a little bit less. And these kind of things can be done quite easily. There are also different algorithms that pdfToolbox uses, and we'll look at some of these in detail. Some algorithms are better suited for some types of job. And then one of the other general principles is that when you add bleeds, you can determine what you use to generate that bleed. And there are two important concepts or things that we need to talk about. One is where you start creating the bleed. If I would create it exactly at the trim box, I might end up with very small white borders around the trim box between the actual content of the file and the bleed, mostly because whoever generated this document didn't stretch the content to exactly the trim box, and there is a little bit of white there. You can correct that in pdfToolbox by starting from a little bit inside of the trim box. So that's one important aspect. And then the other important aspect is that you can select, you can choose what of the page content is used to generate the bleed. And so if I have text that is quite close to the trim box, I could ask pdfToolbox to generate bleed, but not take the text into account. So that's some of the generic capabilities that we have there. And now if I look at some of the examples, so let me take a PDF file here, and then I'm going to, by coincidence, this is something about penguins. And I'm going to run this and, of course, save my file in the results folder again. And so what happens is bleed by mirroring, as it said in the process plan. And you can see that indeed this is like there is a mirror at the trim box. It's one of the bleed creation methods that you can do. The annoying thing about it, as you can see illustrated very nicely here, is that, well, if I have elements that go towards the trim box, they are reversed in direction because I'm mirroring. And that can be kind of annoying because it's pretty visible. I also have a different algorithm that does pixel repetition. So I have the same file here, and I'll just run that. Maybe one of the things that I don't mention while I'm doing this is that pdfToolbox is really, really fast when it comes to processing files, as you perhaps can see as I'm showing things here. This is pixel repetition. And so essentially this looks at the last pixel you have at the trim box and then repeats that as many times as you want bleed to be created. And for this particular document, the results are better already. What is more important perhaps is that when I have a job, as also often happens in banner and sign, when I have a job that is irregular, so a job that has a cut contour, then this pixel repetition algorithm is the only one that is available for those types of jobs. So pdfToolbox can create bleed for irregular files. That's the first important part. And then the second part is that the bleed that is created in this case, when you have an irregular file, so a file that has a cut contour, will always be pixel repetition. And you can see that in this particular file. And then, of course, the bleed can be created in different ways. We can make sure that the cut contour also always nicely remains at the top of the file, that it is always set to overprint, and all kinds of other things that are important during production. Now, there's a couple of other things that you can do regarding bleeds. And there is one that is one very old technique that I'm not even going to show. and that is scaling the document. I could take a document and then scale it by maybe 1% or 2%, and that makes it slightly larger and gives me bleed. The problem with that is that you modify the whole document. I'm going to scale it up by 1 or 2%. It's not a lot, but it will bring all of the text content, for example, slightly closer to the trim. And so I might cause problems because of that. But I'm also going to change the size of a lot of the of all of the objects actually in that file, and that might not always be desirable. The last bleed creation method I'm going to show you is an interesting variation to that. And it's called stretching content. It's like a local stretch that happens only around the trim box area and can give very good results. So I have a banner here that has no bleed created. It is one that has these kinds of, well, it has a pattern in it. And so if we use pixel repetition or mirroring, we're going to get the same effects as what we saw before, and that is not always what we want. So let me run this one. So analyze and fix, and I'm going to put that in results again. And it has created bleeds, and let's zoom in. So this is what happens. What pdfToolbox does is it looks at the area close to the trim box, and it has stretched that content close to the trim box just enough so that it reaches until the bleed box now. And you can certainly, and we're people, we're not ChatGPT, we're people. So you can certainly see that something happened here, right? We know that this arch is supposed to just continue to go down. But if you look at the bleed that is created in this way, it looks very, very natural. I think this technique is very, very suitable for larger files. So if you look at banner and sign, if you have not experimented with this, if you have not looked at this, I would certainly encourage you to see what you can do with this type of bleed creation, because it gives very good results. And certainly for files that are a little bit larger, because it does a local transformation, it does a local stretch. If your file is very small, let's say that you're printing business cards, then you risk that a lot of the useful content is going to be stretched or deformed. But for things like banners and billboards and everything that is over a certain size, this is a really, really good technique, and it creates very natural results. And of course, all of this talk I do about bleed now can be combined with anything else in pdfToolbox. If I first want to create bleed and then I want to add things like cut lines and fold lines, and I want to add additional white space because I have a roll-up banner, all of those things can be combined. And in the process plan I have here for these bleed creation techniques, I have very simple process plans that typically will have only one action in them. But I could easily combine that with a whole range of other finishing techniques. And in fact, I'll show you an example of that. So let's talk about grommets and tiling. Grommets and tiling, or eyelets as they are often called as well, are these marks that are needed for someone to later on in finishing know where to put metal rings, for example. And so this is fully supported in pdfToolbox. I can go from something that has no marks and I can add marks to there. What you see here is an example of only corner marks to be added, but pdfToolbox can very easily be configured that it would put eyelets every, I don't know, half a meter, or that I could say add 5 grommet marks vertically and maybe 3 grommet marks horizontally. So all of these things can be configured. The mark itself that I use can be configured, but adding grommets is completely supported. The other thing that happens a lot with very big files, files that are too large to print in one go, is tiling, where this bigger file is going to be converted into different tiles. And these tiles are then a smaller size that can be printed on the output device, and then they will have to be reconstructed later. Very often done for billboards, for example. And there are some things that are complex about this. It's not just cutting the file in different pieces. What is complex about it is that very often you want to identify each tile because the people who need to construct this outside might never have seen the design, and that could lead to very surprising results. But you also want overlap because, of course, when you fix this somewhere outside to a large billboard, you don't want white lines in between. You want some overlap and so on. And so all of these things need to be taken care of, and pdfToolbox has support for all of that. So let me start actually by showing you a billboard. And then I'm going to run a tiling process plan on there. So there we go. And I'm going to put this in results again. And then it's going to create a new PDF file for me that is now a multi-page file. I have 16 here, as you can see, pages in this file, 15 tiles from 1 to 15, and the first page is a construction page. This can be customized as well. So this is functionality that is built into pdfToolbox, but it uses some of the technology that is available to anyone in pdfToolbox, like the imposition engine and the place content engine. And so you could modify what happens here as well. And so in this case, it created 15 tiles, so 5 columns, 3 rows. And then when I look at each individual page, you can see that it creates a tile. It has construction marks. So the second tile is going to overlap until that construction mark. There is an identification, a number here that says which tile we are looking at. You also find that at the bottom, and so each of these pages contains the same kind of tiling, and I go through all of them. And when you look at the marks, someone could now go and very easily figure out how this should be constructed. So tiling is fully supported. What I showed you is a standard functionality, but I want to show you something else that looks a little bit like tiling, but it's a little bit weird at the same time. So here I have a table throw. So imagine that this is a piece of textile that you can throw over a table, and it has some marketing information in all of these yellow boxes. And so let me show you something that you might think of as tiling, but it's still a little bit different. So this is also pdfToolbox, and this uses the imposition engine to kind of cut out the pieces of cloth that need to be printed on and rearrange them so that they can be printed more efficiently. And this was possible for this type of job because they are going to be printed and then they're going to be cut, and then someone is going to sew these things together in a correct tablecloth that can go over a table. But this is a very important thing to remember about pdfToolbox. There is built-in technology. That built-in technology can be used out of the box, and it offers really valuable stuff out of the box. But if I want to use it for other things, even if they are sometimes very strange things, then that can be done. And this is a really good example of how to be creative with that technology that is built in. And that brings us to the last topic, proofing. And actually, when I say proofing, that is a little bit, well, it's a little bit of a limitation of what I want to talk about. And what I really want to talk about is the fact that pdfToolbox not only allows you to pre-flight files and then cut them apart and so on. It also has a complete engine that is geared towards decorating PDF files, adding stuff on top of a PDF file. And so one of the applications that this can be used for is indeed proofing, but I'll also show you a completely different example. And maybe if I have time, a few more examples. But so in a proofing scenario, what I can imagine is that I have a file like the one on the left, but what I really want to send to the customer is an A4 or a letter-sized document that has a smaller preview of my file, and that then also has maybe some branding information around it, maybe it has some instructions on it. It might have metadata about the job, like what material are we going to print this on? What is the size of this file that you're looking at? So all of these things around it, and maybe it even has a physical box on there somewhere where the customer needs to tick and say, I've seen this, I like this, this is good, you can print it like this. So this is a very typical scenario. And what we see is that in many cases, people still create this type of file completely manually. Someone will take the file itself, will put it in an InDesign or Illustrator template. So import it into that template, and then we'll copy paste a bunch of job information into that template and then save it as a PDF file that can be sent to the customer. It's a bit unfortunate. It takes a lot of time. There is a very high chance of making mistakes when you do this kind of job the whole time. And there are better ways of doing it. It can be fully automated. So let's look at what that would look like. And I have an example file here. The example here is more about is a label actually, but the exact same thing can be done for banner and sign. The size of the job really doesn't matter at all in the technique that we're using here. So I have this label and I want to create a proof sheet, and this is going to be slightly more complex than the proof sheet I've shown you before. And let's put it in the results section. And now the first thing pdfToolbox is going to do is ask me a bunch of questions. So this process plan uses variables, and these variables allow me to modify what is going to appear on the proof. In reality, of course, I would not do this manually. In reality, I would use pdfToolbox in a hot folder version or integrate it with something like Switch, and I would pick up metadata about the job, maybe coming in an XML or in a JSON file, and that metadata would flow as variables into my pdfToolbox process plan. So rather than me manually changing some of these items that are in here, it is the metadata that comes in with the job that would be picked up, and then it would be used in my process plan. And so again, in this process plan, there will be a bunch of steps that are executed, and the final result is a proof sheet. It is an A4 document. As I've said, often it will be something that can be printed on a standard printer. So it might be A4 or A3 or a letter or whatever you want to use for that. But it could be anything. It's really flexible in the way that this is set up. But here I have an A4 document, and then I have some instructions and a disclaimer and so on. And all of the red information that you see on here is information that came in through these variables that I showed you when I ran it. So instead of having to copy and paste information in here, it is added automatically into this template. The template is created using HTML technology, so it is extremely flexible in the way that it can be used, and you can modify it completely. And I'll show you the same file with another template just to drive that point home in a second. A lot of the information is put on here in a very simple way as just text, but you can also see that some of the information is shown in a graphical way. I will get a different image depending on the label winding method in this particular example. But also I have a list of color patches, and these have been calculated by pdfToolbox fully automatically. So what do I mean when I say that the template is flexible and I could make it look completely differently? Well, let's run this again. We'll put it under results. I'm again going to be asked a bunch of variables. You can see that they are different in this case. And just to make sure that you see that this is real and not some trickery going on here, I'll change the number of that. Again, this is a process plan, and so it's going to go through a number of steps. And in the end, it generates something that looks at the same time similar, but very different. I still have textual information that was added. I have my color patches, and I have an indication of what the winding type would be for this type of label. But the layout now looks very, very different. And this is because this is based on technology that is called place content, and place content in pdfToolbox uses an HTML template. And so I can modify this whole HTML template to look exactly the way I want it to look. And I'll show you one more example. I think I have time for that. So maybe two examples, we'll see. So let's show you this one. This is this banner again, and I'm going to show you what happens when I run a process plan on here that is optimized for banner finishing. As you can see, I'm actually not certain that it adds grommets. We'll see what it does. It is one out of a number of examples that I have. It does. So they are added at the bottom. They are difficult to see at the bottom because of the color of the grommet and the color of the background. You can also see them at the top, but you can also see that a line was added around the trim box. So that's a fold line in this particular case. And then the magenta line is I believe, a cut line in this particular case. And then there is some additional white that was added here as well. Bleed was not added in this instance. That just depends on what you need in a particular file. This shows a number of different techniques, of course. It shows you that you can add grommets. It shows you that you can add white space around the file. It also shows you that you can add these lines, these cut and fold lines. And the technology that is used is always place content. And that's why it's very similar to what I just showed with these proofing templates. You're still looking at something that decorates the PDF at place content technology. And then a last example, I think, is I want to again show you something that you can do with place content, but show you that it can look very different from proofing. Yeah. And here I have a billboard. For those of you who are very observant and you look at the size of the billboard at the bottom, it says it's about 30 centimeters by 9.5 centimeters. That looks to be really small. In reality, the files here are delivered at, I believe, 1/46th of the final size. So this would be a humongous billboard once it gets printed. What we wanted to do here was add construction information around the billboard. And so the same place content technology is used for that. And when I run this, again, some variables that I can now modify if I want to, and then the process plan that is run creates some additional white space. It adds some elements here. The black element that you see added on top of the design is a construction element, same with the corners that we have here and then on the left-hand side, but it's harder to see. So those are construction elements. And then if I zoom in on one corner, you can see that text with instructions has been added there as well. There is an identification of which corner or part of the billboard we are looking at. So you can probably imagine that this is going to be cut up and then printed in pieces again. And so this helps with figuring out which piece will be printed, will be glued where on the billboard. And then what is very nice with this one is that a small preview of the whole billboard is added around the actual billboard. Again, this has to do with construction. Imagine that you're struggling with a bunch of different pieces that you have to connect together. You would probably think it's a good idea to have a preview of what the thing should look like once you've put it together. Think about making a puzzle and looking at the box to figure out where the different pieces go, right? So place content was used to add a little preview and then to also add some of this text. And some of this comes in as variables, the things that you saw in that dialog box that popped up. And then there is also size that was calculated from the trim box and is added on here as well. Given that this is a US example, the size is shown in feet and inches. So I think that is just about what I wanted to talk about and also what I have time for, so that's great. Let me just recap very, very briefly what we've talked about. We've looked at pdfToolbox, which really is a very general purpose PDF engine, very good at detecting potential problems, also good at fixing problems and modifying PDF files in general. So it's a very generic engine, but we looked at it through the lens of banner and sign jobs. If you are in a banner and sign workflow, I would hope that you've recognized a lot of these things that I've shown and that they reflect what you typically need to do with jobs and have shown you some of the ways that this process could be automated. Maybe closing remark is that, of course, I've shown a lot of this stuff in isolation. If you would think about this in a workflow type of scenario, so I get these files from the customer and I want to process them as quickly and as good as possible and end up with production ready files, then what we would typically do is look at how can we combine the different things together. How can we do pre-flight together with corrections, maybe together with adding some barcodes, maybe some previews? How can we create a proof from this automatically? And you would build one or more process plans that take this incoming file all the way to a production file, either immediately or in a number of smaller steps. But so even though I've shown a lot of stuff in isolation, this can, of course, be combined. And that means that the process plans become slightly more complex, but you've seen the speed that pdfToolbox has, even on my little laptop that I'm using here. So the speed of the product is such that you can afford to run very complex process plans on the files that come in, and it will still be much faster than someone having to open each of these files manually and fix them in Acrobat and Illustrator, put them in InDesign, whatever people do to fix files. pdfToolbox gives you a completely automated way of handling that.